Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event tonight. I'm here with Meredith Goldstein from the Boston Globe. We're really excited to get this going, but first I would like to take care of some housekeeping items for all of you. So the first thing is, if you'll see on the right side of your screen, we have a chat feature. So if you have any questions for Meredith, or if you have any issues with your video or audio, you can put those into the chat. We'll be watching that the whole time. So please feel free to put those there. We also have an ask a question feature at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to use that throughout the event as well. And we'll be monitoring those questions throughout. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our author for this evening. Meredith Goldstein is a longtime columnist at the Boston Globe. Her advice column, Love Letters, has been running since 2009, so about 12 years now, which is amazing. She also hosts the Love Letters podcast, which is in its 4th season, and then season 5 is on its way. I have to say I highly recommend this podcast. It's been such a delight to listen to this past week. Meredith is also the author of the novels The Singles and Chemistry Lessons, and she also has a memoir called Can't Help Myself, Lessons and Confessions from a Modern Advice Columnist. Her latest book will release in March. It's called Things That Grow. So without further ado, Meredith, I will hand over to you.
Great. So nice to be here. And by here, I mean in my place where I'm always sitting. I'm getting very used to engaging with people online, but so nice to be here has taken on a very different meaning from the place where I always sit. So I'm hoping everybody is getting a picture and that we're figuring out. Please feel free to log in any technical issues and absolutely ask questions, because I have to say that in the normal real world, when I speak to libraries, it's when I get the best questions. So I would hope that even being at home, that'll still count. So anyway, it's so lovely to be here. And I know that one of the reasons I'm here is because this is a week we think about love and relationships because of Valentine's Day. So I'm experiencing, the first sort of coronavirus era Valentine's Day and what that means for a lot of readers, which has just been a very difficult, trying, brave, incredible, and I say that meaning incredible in some not so great ways, a year for relationships. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the letters you're getting right now about, like our title says, love in the time of COVID?
So for those who don't know, I write the advice column at the Globe. And what that means, a lot of people will be, I think you guys even said like Sex in the City, the sort of, and of course, like if you can tell that I'm wearing the most comfortable sweater ever, I am not at all like a Sex in the City character. I will not wear high heels. Even we have cobblestones in Boston. It wouldn't happen. But it's much more in the vein of an Ann Landers column where people write in a question, I give an answer, and then because of the online community, thousands of people can weigh in with their own advice. So in a normal year, questions would range from marriage, breakup, divorce, but before 2020 and into the first months of 2020, the most common question I received was about dating fatigue. And when I say dating fatigue, I mean just the level of exhaustion with dating apps. And for those who are coupled or not dating, because that is not what you're doing in your life right now, apps for dating are on your phone. And that means you can be swiping all day and all night. And I remember actually a few years ago, I had a book event where I met a woman in her 20s and she just started crying and she said, I'm just so tired. I'm just so absolutely tired. She said, even while I'm at this event, I'm thinking, should I be swiping? Should I be swiping? Am I missing somebody? Am I missing somebody? And I think that's a drastic difference when you compare it to the early days of online dating, where you opened a website, you logged in, you checked your messages, and you closed it. So dating fatigue was the biggest problem. Now, as soon as March hit, nothing to be tired of. So it sort of stopped people, allowed them to calm down, and just to take a beat. So I had to at first realize that the problems were going to be very different with single people, and that everybody's problem, whether they label it as a COVID-related question or not, it is. We had a question the other day about someone whose roommates were upset that he brought his girlfriend over. Well, in a normal world, that could just be like about sharing space and roommates. And well, now it's like, well, maybe they're upset she's there because she shouldn't be there to begin with, right? Because they're not in a pod together. So every little thing, you can only see it through one lens right now, which is the lens of the sort of more isolated world we're living in. Mm-hmm. You know, for some long distance couples where their biggest problem was a long distance relationship, a lot of them have been able to work remotely and move in together. So their problem is that they went from not enough to too much. And I'm realizing that no matter what relationship state you were in, this is just so out of body. And you know, a lot of married couples will say to me, we're really not good at this. We're so bad at this. We're annoying each other. And I keep assuring them, like, no one was supposed to be good at this. No one is meant to be cut off from their communities and with a spouse 24 hours a day. No one is meant to do 14,000 meals of dishes. Like, no matter what your resources are, or your level of privilege in the world, like, this just isn't easy. Your routines are completely uprooted. So I think it's been a lot of assuring people that the discomfort they feel is normal. I was actually talking to a couples therapist the other day at MGH, doing a little bit of research about how this has affected us. And I'm trying to write a story about what will we be like coming out of this. And she said that truly some of the only couples who were emotionally prepared for what this meant were recently retired couples. And that's because they already sort of had this strange, oh, I'm here and I'm home and you're home and now we're looking at each other all the time. So I think that's been the big thing. You know, single people in some ways, a lot of them were a little guilty that they actually felt a relief because they had a reason to just stop this, you know, constant looking. And, you know, now they're getting to the point, I think some of them, where they've either met somebody that they had to decide very quickly whether to bubble with them. And that was a big thing, these couples getting serious very quickly. You know, and in other cases, they're saying, okay, now I'm ready. I'm getting ready for the outside world. But every single question has been COVID related, whether they say it or not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So since this pandemic has, you know, brought on all sorts of new experiences for all of us, have you had to do a lot of collaborating to help with your advice column since you're living through it too? How has that worked for you?
Well, I think it's important to remember that, like, advice columnists, most of us we're reporters. We were people who worked in a newsroom and did lots of reporting, and we're not mental health professionals. So I think I've always gone to a lot of mental health professionals to understand the world, and I have thought about these issues like a reporter. I've certainly thought of my own experience as I've done this. But yeah, I mean, I think right at the start of COVID really creating this lockdown, I started a series with the Globe called Taking Care, and I did 10 videos with therapists who all sort of went at our experience from different angles. Like one person who's really a therapist who deals a lot with media, she talked about, well, is too much screen time really too much screen time? Like now there's no escaping screen time. So truly resetting what it means. Well, what screen time is bad? And like, if watching a TV show 6 hours a night with your spouse gives you something to talk about, it makes you happy. Like, why would that be bad? So it was just like all these mental health professionals helping me help readers reset the bars for what's normal in this world. And I really appreciated their input. And I think for them, they're also not sure either. I mean, like a lot of these mental health professionals are looking at other examples of, like, you know, some have talked about 9/11, some have talked about natural disasters and like the aftermath. Does the divorce rate go up? This is different. This is a different time. You know, you can't even compare it to 100 years ago when we had a roaring 20s, because, you know, what we're experiencing is both, like, we can't leave our houses in many cases, but we also have a lot of things on demand. And many people are like, I kept thinking, well, for being stuck, I feel guilty about my level of comfort. You know what I mean? Like, we finally have all this technology to do something like this, right? I mean, it didn't take us very long to figure out how to connect online, and it didn't take, you know, it's like I could order some takeout. You know, like that might have not been able to happen. You know, when you think about Uber didn't even exist, you know, 10 years ago. So, you know, it's just so strange. Like, I think we're adapting really quickly, and I'm already starting to see things on dating apps, which I check regularly to see trends where people are saying whether or not they've had a vaccination. So like the rapid evolution of the way people communicate about their relationships and whether they're single and how available they are. And if there is one, there are very few silver linings at all to this, but one is this sort of forced adult mature communication. I feel like where suddenly people are talking about consent really clearly, because in order to arrange a meetup, you have to say, here's what I feel comfortable with. Here's, I'm going to wear this mask, and this is what I think about this food, or here's how I would allow you into my house. Like people who've perhaps never been that comfortable having conversations about really what makes them comfortable are learning quickly. So so that piece of it, I think, is just, I hope that's something we can hold on to, just this ability to communicate honestly without feeling weird at all.
Yeah, if there is a silver lining, I would say that's got to be it. Better communication between us all.
And I have to say that I know a lot of couples, and I did a story for the Globe this past Sunday about these couples, a lot of couples who met during this. And a lot of them tell me it's because they were slightly less busy and their bandwidth was a little bit different in their brains, and they allowed themselves to prioritize their love lives. So maybe they met on an app, they took a walk together in September. By November, they figured out a way to have a test and bubble up together. I interviewed some couples that are pretty much ready to move in with each other. And now they say they're going backwards because they've never had first dates and they've never been to the movies together or met each other's friends, but they have really bonded during this time.
Wow. So I want to backtrack for a second, because I know that you've been writing this column for about 12 years now, but what got you into dating advice? How did you end up with that as your beat?
Well, for many years I was writing features, and I really thought I was going to be an arts reporter. And I do some arts reporting still. A lot of the arts reporting has to do with relationships, but still. But I think I realized pretty quickly that I was really fascinated about how people connected. And I think this is I was interested in the concept of chosen families. And, I come from a divorced household. I was interested in adults who had to date. And, my mom, who passed away in 2013, she was a brilliant, wonderful musician who also basically started dating when I started dating. So, she was dating after her divorce and I was dating for the first time. And for better or worse, we sort of handle it like peers. And so I think it allowed me to see adults as human people and to think about how little changes, right? That she would just be just as excited when some guy called that she liked. And I knew what this was before really internet dating was as large and acceptable. And when she first started dating, and, we worked a lot of this out together. And in a very funny way, my older sister was much more confident about dating than the two of us. So we would look to her for guidance too. But it was a household where nothing was off limits in terms of talking. And when I started writing for the Globe, I noticed I was doing a lot of these trend stories about relationships and also specifically about technology, because for those who are old enough to remember, Facebook has not been around forever it hasn't been around forever, but even when it started, it was only accessible for college students. And anybody who's seen The Social Network knows that it started just for college students and then they opened it for everyone. And when they opened it for everyone, it was a very big deal. One of the first stories I wrote about why it was a big deal was about high school reunions and about how Facebook had taken away the surprise of high school reunions. Because, one of my childhood favorite movies is a movie called Peggy Sue Got Married. And it's, some of you might know it, Kathleen Turner, but there is a surprise of going to a reunion and not knowing who's going to look this way or who got hot. And that's part of that movie. And I remember seeing as a kid and thinking, oh, I can't wait to go to my high school reunion and figure out how people have changed. But the thing about it is, by the time I had a high school reunion that was of significance, I knew what everybody looked like. They were all on Facebook. And now I know what their children look like. I know when they get divorced and when they get remarried. So I think it took away surprise, but it also made it that much easier to connect with an ex, to find love, to cheat on love, so I was writing a lot of stories about this new world we were living in. People were dropping their landlines. I mean, this sounds very dated, but it's not that long ago. And it was probably a few years into that I was really surprised that the Globe didn't have an internal advice columnist at the time. We had run syndicated columns, one by Margot Howard, who's Ann Lander's daughter, and who went bald. Now I know who went bald, and it's like, I wish sometimes I wanted to be surprised by who went bald.
Exactly.
The strangest things now is sometimes even on Instagram, I see a picture and I'll say, oh, that's my friend from high school. And I realize it's not my friend, it's their child. It's just that their child now looks like what I knew of my friend in high school. But yeah, so, I think that the advice column seemed like the next thing to do. And I just, listen, my sister would say I'm such a hypocrite because I'm such a voyeur and I spend more time thinking about other people's relationships than I do my own. But I like it. And I think for the podcast, which started in 2018, and I was not a podcast person. In fact, there was a very embarrassing moment where I had to admit to somebody at the Globe that I didn't know how to find a podcast on my phone. Like I was like Googling podcast, and it wasn't a part of my repertoire of how I consumed information. But I have now found that what a great way to do storytelling, because you can hear the people and they can tell you about their breakup, and you hear their voice crack, and you hear them get excited when they talk about finding love again. And so for those who don't know, the podcast, each season has a different theme, but they're very edited stories about different people and sort of the lessons people can tell about their love lives. And I really love doing it, because where the letters leave off, like, you kind of don't get the full picture. And the podcast is often all of those little juicy details that I want. So, yeah.
Ooh, we've got a good question from Jenny here. So our first audience question, do you have any advice for me? It's, I've never done online dating and it's intimidating. Mm-hmm.
I think it is intimidating. I also think there are a lot of people who are like, I'm either going to do online dating or I'm not. And that you kind of can't be doing multiple things at multiple times. So one fear I had when apps sort of took over was that everybody was swiping in a bar. I mean, I would literally see 25-year-olds in a bar, like, swiping instead of looking up. And I think that obviously this counts for an open world, not a closed world like the one we're in. Let it be one avenue. Do it, but say that doesn't mean that's the way you have to meet somebody. You can still meet people through a setup. You can still meet somebody at a party when we can go to a party. I think also company is really good. I think that some of the most fun I've had and, some of the most comfortable I've been is when I'm with a friend and we're swiping together. Or like I love to swipe for my younger friends, especially because I pick men that they might not necessarily pick, because of course I'm older and wiser, and they'll laugh and say, oh, I would have never thought of this person. Why did you pick this person for me? So I think, this is supposed to not be a lonely, scary process. And I think that no one experience counts for the whole thing. So if one person sends you some horrible note or is weird or whatever, I think it's very easy to say this will never, and just sort of speak in absolutes. This will never happen for me. Everyone is terrible. I remember the first time I really spent time looking at a dating app, I put it down and I called a friend and I said, well, this would never work for me because I don't like rock climbing, because literally every man was like on the top of a rock. And I thought, well, I don't want to go rock climbing. And every man in Boston who's single wants to go rock climbing. So it's not. And actually some of the people who have pictures of themselves rock climbing, they don't want to go rock climbing. It's just the only picture they have of themselves, right? That's the time that somebody took a picture of them. So I think that just not speaking in absolutes about it and saying it's just one way. It's one way to meet somebody, but it doesn't have to be the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I know it's intimidating, but so is being at a party. I mean, I have to say, like, when I compare the thought of swiping to being in a room where you don't even know if anybody's single or you don't know who's there and you don't know what the content, at the very least with online dating, you can say to somebody, are you interested in this for romance? Like, you can be very straightforward because everybody's sort of there for a reason. So I think I think that makes it a little bit easier to read in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Lynn just dropped off a question for me. So I have it here. How successful are you at swiping for your friends?
Okay. I would love to say that I have a really great record at swiping for friends. I don't. I think that's a difficult process. And I would never take it as far as messaging with the person, because to me, that's sort of a catfishing thing, right? Where I would never pretend to be, I'm not going to Cyrano my way into. So I could blame myself on the bad swipe, or I could blame my friend for not taking it the right steps further at that point. But I will say I have a pretty good track record with setups. And to me, a good setup doesn't have to result in forever. If you set two people up and they go out more than once, you win. Because what are the odds that two people who don't already know each other will have a good enough first date to have a second date? So, I've set people up who've dated for months. My big claim to fame is that I set two people up when I first got hired at the Globe. I think at the time I was probably 25, 26. It was a friend at the Globe who was 24. I set her up with someone who was my age, and they are still together. And I really didn't even think they'd stay together. Like, I was like, oh, maybe that'll be fun for a few weeks. But they're like one of the most stable and wonderful couples in my life. So it was a little bit of an accident. But I think a lot of people feel like setups are nosy, and they're afraid that friends will get mad at them if they set them up with someone they don't like. And I would say it's always worth the risk. Like, we're supposed to be nosy and love our friends. And if our friends say, please don't do this for me, that's one thing. But I would always ask a second time, because like, hey, it's a hard thing to ask for. And I think that we all need help meeting people, and and even with friends, like my favorite thing to do is set people up who I think would be great friends. Like, when I don't have children, but when my friends have children and they have little kids and they need that sort of companionship, I'm so excited to set them up with a different parent to just talk about stuff that maybe I can't quite fully understand. So I think if we can, we're all meant to sort of share our communities as best we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So I have a question about your novels. So your first novel came out in 2012, I believe, The Singles, right? Mm-hmm. So what kind of inspired you to make the leap from writing your column into writing long form?
Well, I got dumped. I think, honestly, every creative person needs to have like a really bad breakup, because it is, listen, what if Taylor Swift would truly exist without breakup? I mean, pick an artist and you will find that that their best work is often during moments of heartbreak. And so I had been thinking about writing a novel. I don't remember why. It was sort of counterintuitive as a journalist, but I felt like in my late 20s, I had been going to so many weddings. And I talk about dating fatigue. I had wedding fatigue. I had bridesmaid fatigue. And I noticed that I was often one of few guests there without a date, and that, especially as I got older, and that there were a few other single guests that were archetypes. One was always like the creepy uncle. One was some guy no one knew. Like, I would point to that person and be like, I don't even know that guy. How that guy, There was always an empty chair for someone who blatantly didn't show up without telling people they weren't coming. And that was like a very offensive thing. There was always a bridesmaid crying in the bathroom. Sometimes that was me, right? I mean, there were variations on a theme here. Sometimes it was a groomsman, sometimes it was, but I noticed that these things, especially at my age, I was starting to see, and I wanted to write a tribute with great respect to these single archetypes. And so it is about 5 single guests at a wedding who are the only people without dates. And it's just so funny because I wrote it so long ago, and I think it's the closest book I have, with the exception of my nonfiction memoir, obviously, to fiction that is not fiction, where I look back and I'm like, wow, I barely changed names, and wow, now I know why this guy was mad at me, right? I mean, it was really, I feel like, a therapeutic response to breakups, the moment where you realize you've really moved on from your young love. You know what I mean? For me, it was about getting over a college boyfriend. It was about saying goodbye to that period of my life. But I really look back at that book sometimes and I think that was on the border of nonfiction. It's sort of an amalgam of many weddings, but it was vivid. It was vivid to some of the weddings the people that had the weddings I was in. So, but you know, once I got used to fiction and sort of where it fell in my life, you know, I'm always going to be a journalist at heart, and I'm going to do a lot of research for books, and I'm going to get my ideas from the real world. But now I feel that much more comfortable truly fictionalizing. And Chemistry Lessons, my first young adult novel, came from an idea based on a column I wrote in the Globe, but became incredibly fictional. It's like involves science that doesn't exist, and I just feel like fiction is good therapy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Couldn't agree more. Let's see. Oh, we have a nice compliment here. Lynn said she loved your book.
Oh, well, thank you. And I think there's a question about the Muse this year. That's actually a really good question. I haven't thought about the Muse. It's a great, I'm curious to see how it works online, but a really wonderful event for writers. Yeah, I mean, I hope this next fiction book, which comes out in March, I think Chemistry Lessons was a young adult book that looked like it was about love, but was actually about grief. And I really wrote it as my mom was sick and after losing her. So it's sort of a fake out. Like, it is a love story, but it is also about loss. And this book coming up is about a girl whose grandmother dies. And so it's sort of the opposite, where on its surface, it seems to be a book about losing a loved one, but in fact, it's actually a love story and a romance. So I think, just based on love letters and the work I do at the Globe and my interests, all my writing is sort of centered on grief and love and the way in which they interact both with family and with romance. And local author Sarah Farazan, who also doubles as an unpaid publicist in the moment, says, "What is your new book called and when will it be?" The plant question. And for those in the chat and watching, Sarah Farazan is an incredible young adult book writer, and also an incredible novelist friend. If you're going to be writing alone in a house, it can be very lonely, so you got to get good writer friends. And Sarah's last book is called Here to Stay, and I highly recommend it. And it's like my books, like my upcoming book, Things That Grow, out March 9th. We're both writers who have chosen to write recent books where our teenage characters get to live here in Massachusetts, and that's a lot of fun. So I think for me, local scenery has sort of been a lot of fun to write about. And Things That Grow takes place really in gardens all over Massachusetts. So, and the Natick Mall. So, hot spots of life in Massachusetts. So, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's awesome. So Things That Grow, March 9th, everybody. One more plug.
And by the way, I don't want to knock any of my other covers because I love all my book covers and I've been very lucky. But this cover for Things That Grow, it is a gorgeous cover.
I'm going to link to it right now so everyone can see it because it is really stunning.
I have never had I love the Can't Help Myself cover. And it was very strange because the Can't Help Myself cover was a building, a sort of like city building with a woman in it who I think is supposed to be me. And it weirdly kind of looked like my old building. Like it looked I had never met the artist. He didn't know where I lived, but it weirdly resembled where I had written the book. But when I opened the Things That Grow cover, because there's that very scary feeling of the publisher sending you a note saying, "It's here, your cover." It's like getting a headshot where you didn't model for it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes writers are consulted about the ideas they might have for the cover. In this case, I was not, but we knew with a title called Things That Grow that takes place in a lot of gardens, we figured there'd be some plants. I gasped. I mean, I did a full double take with this cover. And in fact, if you go to like online, I think her handle is Little Patterns, but Maggie who did the art, she has an adult coloring book coming out this month. So that I've ordered many copies of. So she did a great job. I mean, if you go to her website, if you go to Little Patterns, everything she does could be wallpaper. Like I want to wallpaper my house in her. So I feel very happy. I keep saying the book doesn't even have to be that great. The cover.
cover, it's really important. I definitely judge books by their covers.
But I also, I know that all of my concerns about covers, we have very little control. And, Tom Parada, who is local and of course a very big deal because he wrote The Leftovers and Little Children and Election, he's told me his own cover woes, and he told me a great story about how, I don't know if anybody's read The Leftover. No, maybe it was The Leftovers or Little Children. It might've been Little Children, where I think the image is a goldfish in a bag. And I believe, I think I'm mixing up the book, but at one point they gave him a book that had a high heel on the cover. And he was sort of, and of course the publisher was like, well, more women actually buy the book. And he was like, yeah, but the women who buy this book and are in this book, like, don't want to walk around in stilettos either. They're not Sex and the City either. So, I was always very worried that, especially with my first book, because it was at a wedding and it was sort of labeled women's fiction, which God forbid women's fiction was just fiction, right? That it would have a big purse on it, right? And purses are great. It just didn't match the book. But I've been very lucky that people get the spirit of what I'm writing. And I just could not be any luckier with this book.
Mm-hmm. All right. So my director has a question about your Dates with Cupid column.
Oh, okay. So I need to say, with Dinner with Cupid. So for those who are really into Dinner with Cupid, and I am too, I do not run Dinner with Cupid. It is in the magazine and it is near me, but I am. But what is funny about Dinner with Cupid? So for those who don't know, Dinner with Cupid pairs two people on a blind date, and then that is in the Globe. And now with the pandemic, the dates are on Zoom. So I think they get meals at their house and they actually have a Zoom date, and that's actually really fun. Back in the day, I used to watch the process of them setting the people up. Like, they would have applicants, and by the way, if you know straight men who would do this, sign them up. They will have their pick, because often there is a shortage of straight men who sign up for this, which does not surprise me. But I always teased Dinner with Cupid because, as far as I know, they have not led to any marriages. And often it's just one date. But Love Letters has actually resulted in multiple marriages. And what I mean by that is that people met in the comments section. So the commenters met because they liked each other's comments. And I think we have 3 couples, 2 of them are married. And that was never the intention of the column. So these are people who comment every day. Maybe they go to a Love Letters event or a book event, or they say in the comments section, let's meet up. And so I am just deeply competitive with Dinner with Cupid. And I say, listen, I'm winning. If the race is to the altar, I'm winning. my setups are better, and they're not even setups.
Good to know. Okay, so I think that'll probably answer Sharon's question. All right, we had another one come in here. All right, what is your prediction for the dating scene once we're past the pandemic?
This is such a good question, because I do wonder, is it going to be, I make a lot of jokes about a roaring 20s and how I'm going to get a funky little hat and wear cool outfits and go to jazz club. I'm starting to think about these things, and this could go one of a number of ways, right? For people who've been alone or with the wrong partner, they might be really appreciative of meeting someone who is good company. And they might be that much more willing to say, you know what, I'm going to commit to this because this could happen again, right? That, realizing that having a good partner is deeply essential to them. If I am someone who has been at college and I'm told not to leave my dorm room without a mask, and by the way, that means not making out with people, I might have a very exciting 2023. So I think, when I've interviewed sociologists about what happens after this, and I say, will the divorce rate spike? Will the date? And they always say everything spikes. So anybody who was pausing on something they wanted to do will do it, for the most part. So if you were thinking, I might want to get divorced, you might get divorced. If you were thinking, gosh, before this, I thought I might want to meet somebody, but I just kept waiting, you're going to look for that person. If you were like, you know what, I need to sleep with 50 people, you're going to try to get that done too. So I think what we're just going to see is extreme wish fulfillment, or the act of trying to find it, and that's going to look different for everyone. I don't think it means that people won't commit. I don't think it means that everybody's going to leave their spouses whom they love. Like I think it's going to be very individual. I do think people are going to be less censored about sharing those wants, because already I'm seeing it in letters, which is people admitting things they would never admit, which is, you know what, I do want this, or I don't want that, and I think that might be healthy.
Mm-hmm. So have you been seeing, I'm guessing, more of that this past year in the letters you've received since the pandemic started? Maybe people being a little bit more upfront.
Oh yeah, there's like no filter. And I think people are being honest with themselves. Like, I think usually when people send a letter, there's a disconnect with what they're telling me, but what they're saying. Usually I can take a highlighter over one sentence and say, isn't this really the question that you're asking me? Now they know, and they've had a lot of alone time probably, or they've had no alone time. Like for the parents who are dealing with a 3-year-old and they just know. It's like, oh, here's the problem. Here's what I need. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. I mean, the people I'm worried about a lot of people. I think a lot about college students and about people who are in their early 20s and late teens, because, I spoke to a college class the other day, and I was telling them that, my college breakup, my quintessential college breakup, is significant enough that in my 40s, like sometimes I still get mad. And so it taught me how to fall in love. It taught me how to get hurt. It taught me how to rally from being hurt. You don't have to have that experience in your 20s. Some people don't have it until their 40s. But to talk to college students who seem to be so ready for these experiences, but they can't really have them right now, where there's some formative, I mean, the good news is that they feel like they're missing out on it, but everybody's missing out on it. So there's no fear of missing out. It's just, when can we restart? So I think a lot about those people. And I just think they have to remember, just as everyone does, that we're all asking, who am I going to be when I come out of this? Who do I want to be when I come out of this? That's like a shared experience, and no one's behind. I mean, I also very much feel for people who are looking, women who want to have children who were 37 at the start of this and felt like they were already on a deadline. That like, I hope people are good to themselves about the time they've missed, and not feeling like they have to rapidly make up for experiences that got lost this year.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes me think of what season 5 of the Love Letters podcast will be about, which it's going to be kind of new beginnings, right? New phases of a relationship, new stages in life. Can you give us a sneak peek maybe of what that will be?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, because I think that whether your new beginning is happening now, whether it will happen, or if it happened 10 years ago, hearing people's stories about how they restarted something. So it might be a restart of relationship. It might be a do-over. It might be an entirely new relationship, or a new way to be single. And we've done a bunch of interviews so far, and all of them have been so hopeful. So I talked to one young woman yesterday who, in her 20s and in the past year, got married, moved out of her house, starting life as someone's wife. She just kept saying, I think I'm someone's wife now. And it was just like a funny thing, but having that while completely isolated from all of the people she loves is just a strange way to start a marriage. So hearing her talk about that and what it will look like. We do talk to a couple that met during the pandemic, and how quickly they got to know each other, because I don't know if any of you have watched Bridgerton on Netflix, but this woman, I think all of us have at this point, right? Yeah. But this woman was saying that her courtship with this man, that might have otherwise been in restaurants and maybe with a lot of alcohol, or maybe quick, or maybe they would have slept together quick, that it was so much like a Regency courtship, where they would like promenade down the, she felt like there was this incredible like slowness and like a chaste sort of getting to know you, where they would ask each other these deep personal questions. And then a few weeks in, they were like, maybe, how would we kiss? How would we kiss? We'd have to take our masks off. And because of this patience that they had for each other, they're now basically sped up, where now they're like living together. So to talk about a beginning in this world and what that meant, and doing things backwards like that. So it's already an incredibly fun season. We talked to somebody who really has a boyfriend for the first time, somebody who she really, at an older point in her life. It's just new beginnings is a very hopeful topic, and it makes people say hopeful things. So lots of heaving bosom. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And your bosom heaves more when you're wearing a mask. It's hard to, it's a lot of breathing. It's a lot of, if you combine all of those things, a lot of heaving bosom.
So it looks like CJ had another question. Would you agree that one upside of virtual dating is that people are putting in the emotional work?
Oh yeah, I think people are and again, I don't like to call it silver linings because I would undo this pandemic. Like if I had a magic spell, that's what I would use it for. But there's empathy with this, right? I think, and it's not just the pandemic, by the way, it's also, there were so many things that happened this year, whether it's an election, whether it is protests in the world, whether it's, this has been revving up for many, many years, right? Of just all of that combined with everybody just sitting still for a moment. And yes, some people are out in the workforce and having to do all, it's like, but the way in which the world was working changed. And that altered, I think, all of our brains in a particular way. It gave a little bit more space for empathy for people who already had it. So I'm not saying that everybody became a good and wonderful person, but I am saying that a lot of good people started to get better and to say, I want to be better and I want to be better in my relationship. And I noticed that a lot of people were checking in on me and they were like, oh, she lives alone. Like she's single. Like, what does that mean for her right now? And I was like, it's not that hard to be single with my TV right now. It's kind of like, I'm worried about people who have 2-year-olds that have to be watched all day, who have no childcare, who are working, there are so many Globe colleagues, these reporters are sending me emails at 3 in the morning. And that to me means that that's when their child is asleep. And I feel like one thing that I hope changes is that labor in households became very visible, even if it's on Zoom. And the gender division of labor became very visible, where all of a sudden, I'm going to call out my lovely employer who I love so much. The Globe, which is quite wonderful about needs. They've been incredible from the start. They'll be like, take a walk. There's so many people covering very emotionally complicated things and they want people to be healthy. But you would look at these windows, these little boxes, and a lot of the women in high up positions would have like children all over them and dogs and a lot of the men wouldn't, right? And so even seeing that, and it's not like these kids came out of nowhere, like they've been there the whole time. So it made me that much more empathetic about who I'm calling after hours and what people do once they get home. And I think we've all been quite loving to each other, which is a weird thing to say about the people you work with, but I always hesitate to say workplaces are a family because they're not, it is a business, but the reporters and the editors and the designers and all those people, like everybody want to be healthy. And so I think that whether it's in a colleague situation or a dating situation or a family situation, a lot of people are like, hey, are you okay? In a way that they might not have before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see, another question here. All right.
So Kat, are you giving me a political question?
It is a political question. You see that?
So I don't know if everybody can see it. The question is, could you imagine being someone whose politics diametrically oppose your own? So for me, it did not take the 2016 election for me to feel like that didn't change who I would date. I think I've never been someone who could have been with someone whose sort of view of the world was so drastically opposed from my own. It was really interesting over the last 4 years to get many emails from couples not making it work because of the politics of the last 4 years. And then some who did. One of my favorite notes was from a woman in her late 80s, I think, who she's a Democrat, her husband's a Republican. They were both not Trump people. But she talked about sort of how they got along during the Bush administration, which now seems like sort of not nearly the challenge, but I know a lot of couples do make it work. I don't know, me personally, I think it would be a very difficult thing, but I think that now people are more likely to factor it in. And I also think they're more likely to consider language. One of the things on dating apps that I do see a lot is people describing themselves as politically moderate. So if you said you were politically moderate in 2010, what would that mean? And what does it mean now? And I think that's what's interesting, which is that there seems to be less of a assumption that there's some sort of middle and less acceptance of a middle. Like, I think a lot of people who don't feel like they're middle at all want to deal with even the middle. So I think, it's important. It's not important to everybody, but, it became very important. And I still want to do the story about when you say you're politically moderate I've asked a bunch of people, well, when somebody says they're politically moderate on a dating app, what do you think they mean? And I've heard thousands of different answers, like, oh, well, it means they're never Trump Republican, or, oh, it means they love Biden. It's like, these are all very different things, and the point is we don't know, but suddenly it matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh. Cat.
Yeah. Right. So emails, you don't want to be with them to begin with, but my gosh, yeah. Like, no, it's really, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Jenny was asking, how do you choose your stories, and do you have an editor?
So I do have an editor. Well, yeah, I do. I mean, for the podcast, so you're talking about the podcast, and the bathtub is the exact place to listen to it. I highly recommend it. My favorite podcast, I always wait until I'm in the shower and then I listen to them, because I feel like my brain is actually clear when I'm in the shower. It's too much information. I'm sorry. I have an incredible podcast producer. And when Love Letters started, our producer was Amy Padula, who called me distraught at the start of the pandemic. We had just finished season 3. And she said, I'm so sorry. I just got hired by Serial. And I was like, you should not be upset. You just got hired by Serial. Like, why are you upset? And so I think she's not even allowed to tell me what story she left to go do. And I'm not even sure it's Serial specifically. It's something under that umbrella. But Amy Padula was an incredible producer of the first 3 seasons. I now work directly with Scott Hellman, who's a great editor, a longtime Globe employee who somehow masters every medium. Like, he's the best magazine editor. He's the best podcast editor. He can do audio. He can do this. So he and I pick the stories together. We get a lot of submissions. There are always some personal stories I want to tell, some friends who I beg to come on. And then we sort of do a mix. But we do a lot of recording at the beginning and then figure out where things go. So it's not really episode by episode. It's like we generally have a lot of recording for the whole season and then start to place the audio so that it feels like a bingeable season that tells one large story in small stories, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any shocking topics that you've covered for your column?
The column always is like a little bit, well, I mean, yes. I don't know about shocking, because I can't really run the shocking ones. I mean, we're still a family website and newspaper, but the things that used to shock me don't shock me anymore. And I think that some of the things that shock me are just where I start to feel like an old person scared of technology. But like, one of my favorite letters, and this isn't a shock, but one of my favorite letters that was almost the book title of the memoir was about, there's a woman who'd gone to a guy's house. She had just started dating him. It was made clear that she was not going to spend the night because she had to work early in the morning. And they sleep together. It's time for her to go home. And her issue to me in the letter was, he didn't call me an Uber. And he should have called me an Uber. And that would have been the chivalrous move after we were intimate, knowing that I had to go home. She didn't like that she called her own Uber. And I thought, how is he to know that that's the new opening the door for you? Or it was just odd. It was a moment where I thought, this is a new definition of chivalry. And then I thought about it, and I thought, when I have a friend come visit me, just like a friend, and if it's like sort of a far commute and I'm worried about them getting home safely at night, I've called my friends an Uber, right? If that's something you can afford to do. So it brought up a fascinating discussion where some people in the comments were like, call your own Uber, you're a modern woman. Like, it brought up a lot of issues of what does it mean to do good dating protocol, but also to be a nice human, and how we can't really read each other's minds. And I always wonder if that guy ever found that letter and wondered, is it me? Was it me? So that, I wouldn't say it's like shocking, but it was definitely a moment where I thought, wow, the world is changing. And and I would say the most shocking episode of the podcast, at least in terms of like the weirdness of the story, was this year. The first episode of the season was about a married couple where the husband demanded that he need to build a massive ball pit in his house. He turned 40 and he was like, this is what I need to be happy in middle age, is a ball pit that our children are not allowed to go into, like a Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. That is, for me, a man who is way over 6 feet tall, and this project cost them thousands of dollars, and they have 4 children. And it just was really about compromising in a marriage and figuring out what brings your partner joy. But to me, I'm still shocked. I have seen the ball pit. So that's all I'll say about that. But when you think about marriage and middle age and all the things, like, I think that the woman in the episode, she's like, well, I guess he didn't have an affair. And I was like, wait, what? Is that the bar? Like, it was just such an interesting thing. So, what is the thing you need as you change and your life changes? Well, I just would have never guessed ball pit. So you never know.
Yeah, that's a first for sure.
Kat is saying grilled cheese. Thank you for that. One of the most sort of iconic letters of the history of the column is one where a man wrote in about how, I'm going to do this library style. It's going to be so G-rated, so get ready. A man wrote in about something that wasn't happening at home, that he enjoyed intimately, that his partner was not going to do that. And because he said what it was, and I could not put that on Boston.com, I changed it to grilled cheese sandwich, because that's what I was eating that day. So if you imagine it, my girlfriend isn't interested in giving me the grilled cheese sandwiches that I love. She does not like grilled cheese sandwiches. I want to marry her. Can I now live a life without grilled cheese sandwiches? And listen, long life, right? Grilled cheese is pretty great. So I subbed in grilled cheese for everything he said, and I wrote back, and it's if you Google it, the headline is Allergic to Grilled Cheese, and it's a very funny. Everybody followed the rules. All the commenters would be like, well, have you cleaned your stove? Are you allowed to go to restaurants? And sometimes the metaphors got so big that I was like, what? I don't even know what these people are talking about at this point. But it is sometimes people will, 12 years later, they'll write in and say, oh, I met the best guy. The grilled cheese is great. And I don't even know what the euphemism is anymore.
It's evolved into something out there.
Well, here it is, just grilled cheese. That's what it is. So the end.
All right. So we have a couple more questions. This hour has flown by, but I do want to get to these. So I hope I'm saying it right, if it's Megan or Megan. She's wondering how to navigate COVID dating. Let's see, especially because a lot of people are living at home with parents or family.
And roommates. I think roommates are a big one, because there's it's harder to sort of, if you can't do it, you can't do it right now. I think that's the first thing, which is that you're not missing out on some frantic, exciting world of dating if you have to take a break right now. I think it's really important to talk about the sort of consent issues with the people you live with. Like, if I were to meet somebody, what would make everybody comfortable with them being in the house? Some people are 100% home right now, where it's easier for them to get tested and abide by the rules of somebody else's home. Other people can't. I think Zoom dating is real, and it is happening, and FaceTime dating is happening. Listen, we live in New England, unless you're coming in from abroad right now. It is cold. For people thinking about starting right now, maybe what you're starting with is messaging, and maybe a winter walk, and maybe a FaceTime. I've heard the best stories about FaceTime dates and Zoom dates. So I think it's just understanding that there are, in fact, limitations. There aren't loopholes for all of these things. A lot of the people I talked to for that story about couples who met during this, they live alone, they work from home, the end. It was not that hard for them to couple up together. In a few cases, they had roommates, and the roommates all got together and talked about, now we formed a pod. One foursome I was dealing with, one of the couples broke up in it. So that was really interesting too, which is now we've got this spokes of a wheel. So I would just say, listen, vaccines are coming. Some of us have had them. I have not. This is a really good time to do that Bridgerton long-term courtship, and to maybe message a little and to have a Zoom, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you're living with parents, you might not be doing this till May, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think we'll end on maybe a bit of a personal note, if you don't mind. Marcy.
Marcy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how has the focus of your work impacted how you approach dating? If that's not too personal, it is not too personal. I think the thing I would say, especially during the pandemic, is that I think we're all getting really existential about things. And I think before this, I just didn't have much bandwidth for thinking about the me of the dating piece of it, right? Even if somebody would set me up, I'd be like, oh, like that's, like sort of putting it off for later, right? And thinking everybody else can have their love lives and I'll just write about them. And I think the nice thing is that it slowed everything down. So I think that I've learned a lot. I think I'm skirting around something here, which is that I think when I was younger and working on the column in the early years, I often thought of myself as deeply brave to be single and to have done so much on my own. And I'm at IKEA and I lift the boxes myself. And I, yes, I have an incredible circle of friends and a sister and all of these things, but I thought I got some sort of like single lady prize. Now I'm beginning to realize, especially during this pandemic, that it takes an incredible amount of bravery, humor, creativity to be in a couple, to have partners. And so I think what a great challenge. And so I think coming out of this, I might be way more open to things, than I had been before. And also I will say that writing an advice column, even though you're hearing problems all day, you feel more optimistic about romance because everybody who writes in wants to do better. And so I think I went in as a pessimist in 2009 and I remain an incredible optimist, which is counterintuitive, but that's the way it works.
I love it. That makes me really happy for you. Okay, so I'm going to be selfish and ask, I think, maybe what the last question will be for this evening. But
you deserve it. You deserve it.
Thank you. What are some maybe fun ideas for Valentine's Day that you could recommend for this year?
Well, a few things. I know of a few events actually too. So we did the last podcast episode was about the Boston Pops doing its first live show from Symphony Hall streamed. So that's just happening tomorrow. So if you're like a music person, that's like, it's like I love gather around the computer or the TV, right, and see that. I know that this weekend also Mortified, which is such a great show where adults read from their childhood diary entries. It's called Mortified because it is mortifying. They are doing a stream show. And actually anybody who uses love letters as the code, I think it's just a $5 ticket, but so you can look that up. But I think that watching TV with someone is such a lovely, intimate thing with friends and partners, and to rewatch a movie, to binge watch a show, to plan out all the snacks for different hours, I just think that these simple things can be so fun right now, and board games are so fun right now. And it's like there were so many days in the past where we were like, if I just had one night free, what would I do? Well, now you might have it, right? So it's a good night to treat yourself. Usually I'm not that up on Valentine's Day, but let's do it. Let's do it up. So, but whether it's watching something live, whether it's watching a movie that reminds you of a really great time. And if you, by the way, are having a date with someone remotely, I highly recommend both people making or ordering the same dish and then sharing it on Zoom. I think that's a lot of fun to see how two people's dishes came out. It's like kind of like a cooking show, and also, and you get to eat.
That's, the most important thing is you get a delicious meal at the end of it. My boyfriend is tuned in right now, so I hope he was taking notes at the last part of that.
Movie, all of the things. It just happens at home.
All of it. All right, Meredith. So it's almost 8:00. I think we're gonna wrap up. But this was so wonderful. We're so glad that we got to have you this evening. This was a really delightful conversation.
And I hope you're all safe and well and snuggled and like me right now, wearing pajama pants. So, and support your libraries to do it. This is so wonderful. I think when it's safe, we're all going to flock to the library and thank our librarian friends for
Yes, we miss all of you so much. So I just want to say one more time, Meredith's book will be out on March 9th. We are ordering a copy here, so please put a hold on it and read it. All right. Well, good night, everybody, and take good care.
Very good night.
Bye.